Look at this mansion, 100 rooms of priceless art, costing $5 million in 1914. The man who built it made his fortune by crushing workers. Armed guards opened fire. 10 died. Then he went art shopping in Europe. His name was Henry Clay Frick. His wealth came from blood. And before that, his private club ignored dam warnings until it collapsed and drowned 2,200 people, including 400 children. No one was punished. Today, this collection is called a gift to the public, but behind every masterpiece is a dead worker and a drowned family. Let's begin. Henry Clay Frick was born in 1849 in West Overton, Pennsylvania. His grandfather owned the old Overholt whiskey distillery, but his father was broke. The family had nothing. At 21 years old, Frick made a vow. He would be a millionaire by age 30. And he meant it. He borrowed money from his family. He formed Frick & Company with his cousins. They built 50 coke ovens. Coke is what you get when you bake coal to remove impurities. It's essential for making steel. And in 1871, Pittsburgh's steel industry was exploding. Here's where it gets interesting. In 1873, the worst financial panic in American history hit. Banks collapsed, companies went bankrupt, workers starved in the streets. But Frick didn't panic. He bought out every competitor at rock-bottom prices. While others were selling, he was buying. By 1880, he controlled 80% of Pennsylvania's coke output. 80%. That's not a business, that's a monopoly. He employed 1,000 workers. He operated coal mines across Westmoreland and Fayette counties. He shipped 100 train cars of coke every single day. The numbers tell the story. By 1879, at exactly age 30, Frick was worth $1 million. That's $35 million in today's money. He had kept his promise, but he was just getting started. In 1881, he met Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie needed coke. Frick had coke. They formed a partnership. Carnegie brought the money, Frick brought the ruthless efficiency. Together, they would build the largest steel empire on earth. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was what Frick would do to maintain control. The real story was how far he would go to crush anyone who stood in his way. The real story was building an empire on the backs of men who worked themselves to death. And here's the part nobody's talking about. Before Frick became Carnegie's partner, he joined an exclusive club, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. Andrew Carnegie was a member. Andrew Mellon was a member. The wealthiest men in America belonged. They bought an abandoned reservoir. They turned it into a private lake. They built a 47-room clubhouse. They had 16 private cottages, steam yachts, sailboats. They went there to escape the noise and heat of Pittsburgh. But here's the kicker. To make the lake better for fishing, they made modifications to the dam. They lowered it by 3 feet so carriages could drive across the top. They put fish screens in the spillway to keep bass from escaping. They never hired a proper engineer to check if it was safe. The lake sat 450 feet above the city of Johnstown. 2 miles long, 1 mile wide, 60 feet deep, 14 million tons of water held back by an earthen dam that had already partially failed once in 1862. Engineers from the Cambria Iron Company sent warnings. The club president wrote back, "You and your people are in no danger from our enterprise." Wait a minute. You see what happened here? May 31st, 1889. The worst rainstorm in recorded Pennsylvania history. 6 to 10 inches in 24 hours. By morning, the lake was rising 9 to 10 inches per hour. Club president Elias Unger looked out and knew they were in trouble. He ordered Italian immigrant laborers to dig new spillways. They tried to unclog the existing ones, but the modifications had reduced the dam's discharge capacity by half. Those fish screens were clogged with debris. At 3 p.m., the South Fork Dam gave way. 20 million tons of water, a 70-foot wall of death racing down the valley at 40 miles per hour. The roar could be heard for miles. A dark cloud and mist preceded it. Then came the wave. Mineral Point was obliterated, gone. Every building, every person wiped from existence. East Conemaugh was next. The wave picked up several hundred boxcars, a dozen locomotives, more than 100 houses, growing numbers of corpses. Then it hit Woodvale, where the Cambria iron mill stood. Then Johnstown itself. The flood lasted 10 minutes. 10 minutes to destroy 4 square miles. 1,600 homes crushed like eggshells. Trees snapped like toothpicks. The numbers are staggering. 2,209 people killed. 400 were children. 99 entire families completely wiped out. 900 bodies were never found, not identified, not recovered, gone. Bodies floated as far as Cincinnati, 400 miles downstream. The Pennsylvania Railroad stone bridge caught 30 acres of debris 40 feet high. After dark, it caught fire. The wreckage burned through the night while people trapped inside screamed. The damage, $17 million in 1889 money. That's $473 million today. And here's the real problem. When survivors filed lawsuits against the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, the courts ruled it an act of God. Not one member was found liable. Not Andrew Carnegie, not Henry Clay Frick, not Andrew Mellon. Nobody. Historian David McCullough later wrote, "Not a nickel was ever collected through damage suits from the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club or from any of its members." Think about that. They modified a dam without proper engineering. They were warned it would fail. It killed over 2,000 people, and they paid nothing. But here's what makes it worse. Recent research from the University of Pittsburgh proved the 1891 investigation was a cover-up. Engineers who investigated the Mill River Dam failure in Massachusetts 5 years earlier had lambasted the owners for poor construction and negligence. But at Johnstown, different story. When you're investigating a dam owned by the greatest industrialists and financiers in the country, suddenly it's just bad weather. An act of God. Nothing anyone could have done. The truth? If the club had repaired the dam to its original 1839 specifications, it would have survived the storm. But they wanted carriages on top. They wanted fish in their lake. And 2,000 people paid with their lives. Frick did donate thousands to relief efforts. Carnegie built the town a new library. Philanthropic gestures after mass death caused by your own negligence. And the world moved on. But that wasn't the real reason nobody went to jail. The real reason was power. Absolute, concentrated power. When you control the courts, the politicians, the judges, and the juries, you control the truth. When your fortune can buy anything and anyone, accountability disappears. And 3 years later, Frick would use that same power to crush workers who wanted a living wage. Let me show you how bad it really was. In 1892, Carnegie Steel was making record profits, $4.5 million just that year. Carnegie himself exclaimed, "Was there ever such a business?" The company was printing money. Steel prices were high. Demand was soaring. Everything pointed to good times. But Frick wanted to break the union. The Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers represented the skilled workers at the Homestead plant. They had negotiated exceptional wages and work rules. They had a voice, and that infuriated Frick. He complained to Carnegie, "The mills have never been able to turn out the product they should, owing to being held back by the amalgamated men." Here's the truth about working conditions. Listen carefully. Workers at Carnegie's mills worked 12-hour shifts every single day, 7 days a week. Their only holiday was July 4th. That's it. 1 day off per year. The average wage was $10 per week. That's $500 a year, just above the poverty line. It took the combined wages of nearly 4,000 steelworkers to match what Andrew Carnegie earned. The work was hell. Flames, noise, danger everywhere. Open hearth furnaces reached 3,000 degrees. Protective gear consisted of 2 layers of wool long johns. That was it. Men were burned alive regularly. Ladles of molten iron tipped over and exploded. Slag fell on workers and killed them. A Homestead laborer said in 1894, "You don't notice any old men here. The long hours, the strain, and the sudden changes of temperature use a man up." Sociologist John A. Fitch called it old age at 40. But that wasn't even the worst part. When workers couldn't keep up due to age or exhaustion, they were fired immediately. No pension, no compensation for injuries, no job security. And wives dreaded the factory whistle because it meant another accident, another death. One worker said, "They wipe a man out here every little while. Sometimes a chain breaks and a ladle tips over and the iron explodes. Sometimes the slag falls on the workman." Of course, if everything is working all smooth and a man watches out, why, all right. But you take it after they've been on duty 12 hours without sleep and running like hell, everybody tired and loggy, and it's a different story. Now here's what Frick proposed in 1892. Even though the company was making record profits, even though steel prices were up, he demanded an 18% wage cut. 18%. For 325 workers who had already taken pay cuts 3 years earlier. The union's 3-year contract expired June 30th, 1892. Carnegie went on vacation to Scotland. He made sure to leave Frick in charge. He knew what was coming. Carnegie wrote to Frick, "We approve of anything you do. We are with you to the end." Carnegie wanted the union broken, but he wanted Frick to do the dirty work so he could maintain his public pro-labor image. Classic manipulation. Frick built a 10-foot-high fence around the plant, topped with barbed wire. 3-inch rifle holes every 25 feet at shoulder height. Workers called it Fort Frick. He advertised nationwide for strikebreakers. He prepared for war. On June 29th, he locked out all 3,800 workers, union and non-union. He fired every single person. Then, he called the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. The Pinkertons were hired thugs, strikebreakers, corporate mercenaries. They had broken unions nationwide. And on July 5th, 1892, 300 Pinkerton agents boarded 2 covered barges on the Ohio River. They were given Winchester rifles. They wore badges reading Watchman Carnegie Company, Limited. Many didn't even know where they were going. They'd been hired at $2.50 a day out of Boston lodging houses. The strikers were ready. The union had learned the Pinkertons were coming. Workers had formed an advisory committee. They organized the town militarily, 8-hour shifts, river patrols, signaling systems. They controlled water, gas, and electricity. They had taken over the entire town. At 2:30 a.m. on July 6th, the plant whistle blew. Thousands of men, women, and children rushed to the docks. When the Pinkertons tried to come ashore, someone started shooting. Nobody knows who fired first. But what happened next was a 14-hour battle, a pitched gun battle between armed workers and corporate mercenaries. The numbers vary by source, but here's what's confirmed. At least 10 people were killed, 7 workers, 3 Pinkertons. Dozens more were wounded on both sides. The Pinkertons were trapped on their barges in 100-degree heat. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Many weren't professional agents, but desperate men hired under false pretenses. Finally, they surrendered. Then came the gauntlet. The workers forced them to walk through a line of angry men, women, and children. They were beaten, kicked, clubbed. By the end, 20 Pinkertons had been shot, 7 killed, and 300 injured. On July 12th, Pennsylvania Governor Robert Pattison sent in 8,500 National Guard troops. The entire town was placed under martial law. By August, the company had imported enough strikebreakers to restart production. By November, the union admitted defeat. 160 workers were charged with murder and assault. None were convicted. Local juries refused to convict their neighbors for defending their jobs and families. But it didn't matter. The strike had been broken. Frick's response? He slashed wages across the board. He imposed 12-hour workdays. He eliminated 500 jobs. The workers who came back earned less, worked more, and had no union protection. In the 9 years after Homestead, Carnegie Steel's profits rose to $106 million. Labor historian David Brody documented that skilled workers' daily wages shrunk by 1/5 between 1892 and 1907, while their shifts increased from 8 hours to 12. For 26 years, union organizing among steelworkers was crushed. And here's the kicker. On July 23, 1892, a Russian anarchist named Alexander Berkman walked into Frick's office and shot him twice. Once in the shoulder, once in the neck. Then he stabbed him 3 times. Frick survived. He was handling correspondence from his bed the next morning. Back at work 10 days later. The assassination attempt turned public sympathy against the strikers. Berkman served 22 years in prison, and Frick became even more powerful. But that wasn't the real reason Frick won. The real reason was that power always crushes labor when government sides with capital, when governors send troops to protect scabs instead of workers, when courts refuse to hold corporations accountable, when the legal system exists to preserve wealth, not justice. Now let me show you what Frick did with all that blood money. By 1900, Frick and Carnegie were finished. The partnership had soured. They went to court over coke prices. In March 1900, Frick received $30 million in securities. That's $1.1 billion in today's money, for leaving the partnership. In 1901, Carnegie sold the company to J.P. Morgan for $480 million. It became U.S. Steel, the world's largest steel manufacturer. Frick became a director. His wealth continued to explode. He moved to New York in 1905. He was 56 years old. Time to enjoy his fortune. Time to build his legacy. Time to buy beauty with blood money. Frick had started collecting art seriously in his late 40s, but now he went into overdrive. He spent an estimated $10 million on art during his lifetime. That's $300 million in today's money. In 1906, he bought Rembrandt's self-portrait from 1658 for $225,000. That's $8 million today. In 1910, he acquired Rembrandt's Polish writer for nearly $300,000. That's $11 million today. Vermeer was his obsession. Only 34 Vermeer paintings exist in the world. Frick bought 3 of them. In 1901, he paid $26,000 for Girl Interrupted at Her Music. In 1911, he paid $175,000 for Officer and Laughing Girl. In 1919, just before he died, he bought Mistress and Maid for $250,000. He also collected Titian, El Greco, Goya, Turner, Van Dyck, Bellini, Whistler, Degas, and more. He bought 18th century French furniture. He purchased sculptures. He amassed one of the finest art collections in America, but he needed a place to display it all. In 1906, Frick purchased the Lenox Library site on Fifth Avenue between 71st and 72nd Streets. He paid $2.4 million, that's $85 million today, just for the land. 4 months later, he bought an additional parcel extending 50 feet through the block. But he couldn't take possession until 1912 because of legal restrictions on the library's endowment. So he waited, and he planned. Because from the very beginning, Frick intended the house to become a museum after his death. He hired Thomas Hastings of Carrere and Hastings, the firm that designed the New York Public Library. He told them to design a mansion that would showcase his art, not a home first and gallery second, a gallery first that a family could live in. Construction began in 1913. The budget was $3 million for construction. That's $98 million today. Including the land, the total cost was $5.5 million. That's $160 million today. More than Carnegie's mansion, more than Charles Schwab's mansion, more than J.P. Morgan's house, more than William A. Clark's estate, the most expensive residence in New York. The design was Beaux-Arts style. 3 stories, limestone facade, 3 wings arranged in an L shape, elaborate pediments, double-height pilasters in the Ionic order, a massive picture gallery along 71st Street. But here's what made it different. The house was set back from Fifth Avenue with an elevated garden in front. Every other mansion on Millionaire's Row was built right up to the street. But Frick wanted separation, isolation, a wall between his wealth and the masses. The interiors were designed by Charles Allam and Elsie de Wolfe. Allam's work alone cost $300,000. The decoration budget was massive: silk walls, hardwood floors, self-playing organs, mother-of-pearl servant buttons, bowling alleys in the basement, billiard rooms. 27 servants lived on the 3rd floor. The 2nd floor was the family's private quarters. Henry had a bedroom and sitting room facing Fifth Avenue. His wife Adelaide and daughter Helen had their own suites. Chinoiserie murals decorated the ceilings. The 1st floor was the gallery, room after room filled with masterpieces: the living hall, the West Gallery, the East Gallery, the Oval Room. Vermeer's hung next to Rembrandt's, Goya's next to Titian's, Turner's next to El Greco's. Frick moved in September 1914. He lived there until he died December 2nd, 1919. 5 years, that's it. 5 years in a $160 million house. His fortunate death? Some sources say $50 million, others say $145 million. One source from 1918 claimed he was worth $225 million, second only to John D. Rockefeller on the first ever Forbes rich list. Let's use the conservative number. $50 million in 1919 is $1.8 billion today. He left 80% to charity, $40 million to public causes, $15 million specifically to maintain his house as a museum. He left the entire art collection to the public. His wife, Adelaide, lived in the house until she died in 1931. Then trustees began the transformation. They hired architect John Russell Pope to expand the building. They added the Oval Room, the East Gallery, a lecture hall, a music room, and the enclosed garden court. In December 1935, the Frick collection opened to the public. Today, it houses 1,100 works spanning the Renaissance to the 19th century. 3 Vermeers, multiple Rembrandts, Bellini, Titian, El Greco, Holbein, Goya, Van Dyck, Renoir. It's regarded as one of the world's greatest privately owned museums. Critics call it the finest house in New York City. Tourists walk through and stare in awe. They talk about Frick's taste, his eye for beauty, his gift to humanity. But nobody talks about where the money came from. Now, let me tell you the 5 reasons this story stays buried. Reason 1. Art washes away sins. When you donate a Vermeer to the public, people forget the workers who died so you could buy it. Museums don't hang plaques next to paintings that say, purchased with profits from labor suppression. They say, donated by Henry Clay Frick, and everyone applauds. Art creates moral distance. You can't see the blood on a Rembrandt. Reason 2. Philanthropy is the ultimate reputation cleanser. Frick gave away $40 million. That sounds generous, until you remember he kept $50 million and earned it by paying workers starvation wages while working them to death. But history remembers the 40 he gave away, not the thousands he exploited. Rockefeller did it. Carnegie did it. Every robber baron did it. Give away 10% of an immoral fortune, and suddenly you're a hero. Reason 3. Time creates mythology. 100 years later, the Homestead Strike is just history. The Johnstown flood is just a story. The 12-hour workdays are just statistics. Time sanitizes brutality. We see the mansion and the art, but we don't see the bodies. We don't smell the burning flesh in the steel mill. We don't hear the screams as the floodwaters crash through Johnstown. Time turns horror into heritage. Reason 4. The wealthy control the narrative. Museums need donors, historians need grants, archives need funding, and all of that money comes from people who don't want class warfare discussed. So we get sanitized histories, we get complicated legacies, we get both sides storytelling, we get told Frick was a man of his time who made tough decisions in a competitive industry. We don't get told he was a murderer who valued art more than human life. Reason 5. We want to believe wealth is earned, not stolen. American mythology says anyone can make it. Work hard, get rich. Frick started with nothing and became a millionaire by 30. That's the American dream, right? Wrong. Frick monopolized an industry, crushed competition during a depression, exploited workers, and got away with mass death. But admitting that means admitting the system is rigged, and we don't want to believe that. So we go to the Frick collection. We admire the Vermeers. We take photos of the garden court, and we never ask how a man who locked out workers and caused thousands of deaths got to live in luxury while the people who built his fortune died at 40 from exhaustion. But here's the part that should terrify you. This isn't history. This is the blueprint. Look at today's billionaires. They all follow the Frick playbook. Exploit workers, monopolize industries, buy politicians, avoid accountability, then donate to museums and universities to clean up their image. Jeff Bezos pays warehouse workers poverty wages while they pee in bottles to hit quotas. Amazon workers die in warehouses during tornadoes. And Bezos donates to climate causes and builds rocket ships. Elon Musk fights unions, violates labor laws, and poses as humanity's savior. The Walton family built Walmart on suppressed wages and government subsidies while workers need food stamps. Then they fund education initiatives. It's the same pattern. Brutalize labor, concentrate wealth, control government, sanitize reputation. The only difference is we're watching it happen in real time instead of reading about it a century later. Frick worked his employees 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, until they died at 40. Modern corporations work people multiple jobs with no benefits until they're homeless. Different era, same exploitation. Frick owned the courts and politicians. Modern billionaires donate to both parties and write the tax code. Different era, same corruption. Frick built a palace with blood money and called it charity. Modern billionaires build super yachts and Mars colonies and call it innovation. Different era, same moral failure. The system that allowed Frick to get away with murder is the same system that protects billionaires today. No accountability, no consequences, no justice. Just wealth protecting wealth while workers suffer. And we're supposed to be grateful when they donate pocket change to charity. We're supposed to call them philanthropists. We're supposed to tour their foundations and museums and thank them for their generosity. Here's what we should do instead. We should remember that every fortune built on exploitation is a crime. Every palace financed by suffering is a monument to injustice. Every masterpiece purchased with blood money is stained. The Frick collection is beautiful, but it shouldn't exist. Not like this. It should be a museum of shame, not a museum of art. Every painting should have a label showing the true cost. This Vermeer was purchased with profits from a system that killed workers at 40. This Rembrandt was bought with money earned by locking out starving families. This Turner was paid for by crushing unions with armed guards. That would be truth. What we have now is propaganda. Let me break down what Frick's wealth actually meant in human terms. In 1892, the average homestead steelworker made $10 per week. It's $520 per year. A skilled worker made slightly more but was still barely scraping by. Meanwhile, Carnegie Steel made $4.5 million in profits that year alone. Here's what that means. If you took just 1 year of Carnegie Steel's profits and divided it equally among the 3,800 workers Frick locked out, each worker would have received over $1,150, more than double their annual wage. But that's not what happened. Carnegie and Frick kept the profits. They used them to build empires, to buy mansions, to collect art, while workers died in poverty. After Homestead, profits soared to $106 million over the next 9 years. That's an average of $11.8 million per year. The workers who made that possible? They took pay cuts and longer hours. Now look at Frick's personal fortune. Let's use the $50 million figure at his death in 1919. If he had distributed that wealth equally among the 3,800 homestead workers, each would have received $13,157. That's 25 years' worth of wages, enough to buy a home, send kids to school, retire with dignity. Instead, Frick spent $5 million on a mansion, $10 million on art, and kept the rest. Here's another way to look at it. Frick spent $175,000 on a single Vermeer painting in 1911. One painting. That sum would have paid the annual wages of 337 steelworkers for 1 year. Think about that. 337 families could have had a living wage for a year, but Frick wanted a Vermeer. Or consider the Johnstown flood. 17 million in damage, 2,209 people killed. The South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club paid exactly $0 in compensation. But Frick donated thousands to relief efforts. Let's be generous and say he donated 10,000. That's 0.05% of the total damage, pocket change, and people called him generous. The math reveals the truth. Extreme wealth concentration requires extreme exploitation. You cannot accumulate $50 million by paying workers fairly. You cannot buy 3 Vermeers by treating employees with dignity. You cannot build a $160 million mansion by sharing profits equitably. Frick's fortune was built dollar by dollar, death by death, exploitation by exploitation. Every Rembrandt cost lives. Every room in that mansion was paid for in blood. The numbers don't lie. The system does. So what happened after Frick died? The Frick collection opened in 1935. Today, it's on the National Historic Landmark list. It attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors per year. People come from around the world to see the Vermeers. Art students study the collection. Scholars write papers about Frick's impeccable taste. In Pittsburgh, the Frick Art and Historical Center preserves his legacy. His daughter, Helen Clay Frick, founded it. She spent her life promoting her father's cultural contributions. She bought more art. She funded museums. She built the family mythology. In 2024, the Frick Pittsburgh partnered with the Frick Collection for a joint exhibition called Vermeer, Monet, Rembrandt, Forging the Frick Collections. Museums celebrated the union of two extraordinary collections. They praised the Frick family's shared passion for art. Nobody mentioned Homestead. Nobody mentioned Johnstown. Nobody talked about the workers who built the fortune that bought the art. But some people remember. In Pittsburgh, working-class families still tell stories about the Homestead strike. They remember their great-grandfathers who lost their jobs, who were blacklisted, who never worked in steel again. They remember the families who were destroyed. In Johnstown, the Flood Museum preserves the memory of 1889. They show photographs of bodies stacked like cordwood. They display wreckage from homes that were obliterated. They remember the 99 families who were completely wiped out. But those memories are fading. The people who lived through it are gone. Their children are gone. Their grandchildren are elderly now. In another generation, it will just be history. Just dates and numbers. Just unfortunate events that happened long ago. And the Frick Collection will remain. Beautiful, pristine, revered. A monument to wealth and taste and cultural sophistication. Everything brutal and violent that created it will be forgotten. That's how it always works. The powerful write history. The museums tell their version. The universities celebrate their philanthropy, and the truth dies with the victims. Unless we refuse to let it die. Unless we keep telling the story. Unless we connect the past to the present and show that nothing has changed except the names. The system that allowed Frick to exploit workers and escape accountability is the same system that protects Amazon, Walmart, and every modern corporation. The ideology that justified 12-hour workdays is the same ideology that says workers don't deserve a living wage today. The propaganda that turned Frick into a patron of the arts is the same propaganda that turns modern billionaires into heroes. The pattern repeats because we let it. Because we tour the museums and admire the art and forget to ask where it came from. Because we celebrate wealth without examining how it was created. Because we accept the mythology instead of demanding the truth. So here's where we are. Henry Clay Frick rose from poverty to become one of the richest men in America. He controlled 80% of Pennsylvania's coke output. He partnered with Andrew Carnegie to build the world's largest steel empire. He was worth $50 to $145 million at his death. He was also responsible for the Johnstown flood that killed 2,209 people. He crushed the Homestead strike with armed guards that left 10 dead and hundreds wounded. He paid workers starvation wages while forcing them to work 12-hour days, 7 days a week until they died at 40. He built a $160 million mansion filled with $10 million worth of art, and then he gave it all to the public and called it charity. Today, we're supposed to see him as complicated, a man of his time, a product of the Gilded Age, someone who made tough choices in a brutal era but ultimately contributed to culture and society. That's garbage. Frick was a monster who used philanthropy to wash away his crimes. He killed thousands through negligence and exploitation, then bought moral absolution with paintings. He represents everything wrong with unchecked capitalism. He proves that extreme wealth requires extreme cruelty. He shows that the system protects power, not people. And nobody's talking about this because the wealthy don't want us to, because universities need donors, because museums need funding, because the narrative of the self-made billionaire philanthropist must be preserved. Because if we admit Frick was evil, we have to admit that modern billionaires are too. So we get sanitized history, we get beautiful museums, we get cultural landmarks that erase the suffering they were built on. We get to admire Vermeers without thinking about the workers who died so Frick could buy them. We get the art without the blood, the beauty without the cost, the legacy without the truth. But the truth remains. Behind every masterpiece is a murdered worker. Behind every marble column is a crushed union. Behind every room of that mansion is a family that drowned or starved or died from exhaustion. The Frick collection isn't a gift to humanity. It's a crime scene. Display destroys wealth. Saving builds it. But exploitation creates fortunes, and philanthropy hides it. That's the lesson nobody wants you to learn. That's why they don't talk about the darker story of Frick's art empire. Next video? I'm going to show you what happened to the Vanderbilt fortune. 100-room mansions, 9 generations of wealth, all gone. And the reason nobody saw it coming will blow your mind. If you want to see how America's greatest dynasty collapsed, hit subscribe. Because I'm going to show you the financial decisions that destroyed a billion-dollar empire. And they're the same mistakes people make today.